Third was roots and culture. So getting into that, um, one thing I noted in here was you talk a bit about um young people in black communities, or not even young people, but basically individuals in black communities that maybe don't get involved in politics because they just don't feel like they care or that they're represented. So I wondered, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think that it's understandable and it's like the change needs to come from elsewhere, or do you kind of get a bit frustrated and you're like, yes, I know we're not represented, but you still, unless we all unify and come together to take the best of two evils, we're never going to get anywhere.
I think it's an amalgamation of what you said. I feel like I'm never in the position to tell somebody what they should or shouldn't do. I understand both sides of it. I understand when young people are like really frustrated at the system. They're like, well, if I can't walk down the street without getting stopped and searched, how would my voice be heard when I go and vote? I understand that, but also I understand that participating in the process is how we bring in change, because we can vote out the idiots, get people in that we like, or people that speak to our cause, and then obviously make change through that. So I think it's a best of both worlds. But I think that for those who don't judge, those who don't vote or participate in political process, I think the more we kind of are like, you should, and like shake our fists at them, the more we push them away from it. I think it's exposing them to the information and showing them actually how your vote and how your kind of involvement in this process can actually bring about change.
Mm. How do you feel about people that use the term black on black crime?
Idiots. Because crime is about proximity. It's like if we go and we look at, say, like somewhere like Scotland, where the majority of like stabbings that are going on are being conducted by white people, is that white on white crime? No, it's proximity. It's about who you're around. I could go out here right now and get stabbed by a black person and they would put it black on black crime. Someone come and stab me and the white person, it'd just be crime. It's like, at what point do we need to put someone's ethnicity in there to determine the crime? It's just literally a proximal issue, and I think more of that, the more we do that, is just used to push the narrative of violence, particularly around the criminalization of young black boys.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Moving on to the next track we're going to play is My Antenna. Now, I think this is probably one of my favourite tracks off the LP, if I'm being honest, and it's interesting because it's almost more of like a spoken word piece than rap, I would say. And I just wanted to hear, obviously, we're going to hear your thoughts as part of the track, but what are your general thoughts on the idea of cultural appropriation?
I think that cultural appropriation is an interesting one, and I feel like it's mainly something I feel like it's not necessarily my place to speak on the appropriation of hair, although I have a perspective on it. I think that this is an issue for black women, and perhaps my space as a man is to stand aside and allow the black women to fill that space and have those kind of conversations and put their perspective across. I feel that as someone who has a younger sister who's a black woman, I see like as I say in the poem, I see the value of that. I see that, the fact that Kim Kardashian can go and put cane rows in her hair and everyone's like, it's really cool. But then like when my sister used to go to school with cane rows, people would be like, oh, what's your hair? And asking these questions and asking just microaggressive questions like, is that your real hair? Things like that. Things that happen to me. People ask, is that extensions? No. Does it look like extensions? Can I touch your hair? No, I'm not a dog. Don't try and pet man. Like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And what would you argue to the people that would say, "Oh yes, but I still appreciate black culture, so I should be able to do the like." Some people would like say, "Oh, as long as I'm paying homage to black culture, I'm going to BLM protests, like I'm signing petitions, whatever. That I'm doing my bit, so I should be able to do what I want."
I'd say, how are you adding value to it? I think the keen thing with understanding intentions behind the use of different cultures is how you're adding value to it. There's a brand that I collaborated with recently called Akala, where we did this cool thing about identity, and they printed another poem I wrote for them on the back of the hoodies. And Kala was a company run by a seamstress called Jess. Shout out Jess. And she was working with textiles from different cultures, and she said she's done a status about it. You can go and read it like on her feed, but she was like, I'm gonna stop doing this because I don't feel comfortable as a white woman doing this. And that for me, I was like, actually, but you're doing it in the right way. You're adding value to these cultures because you're bringing the textiles out, you're explaining it, you're showing it, you're working with people who are attached to the cultures from the textiles that you're using. So you're actually doing it in the right way. But if that's someone like that who is doing it in the right way and still feels comfortable, I'm just like, the other people who are not willing to listen, they're parts of the problem. They need to actually reflect and think about how are you adding value. If you're going to use something, then add value to it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And hearing you speak so eloquently on it, I think the thing is, all this information is out there. There's just a lack of desire to actually engage with it. And I was saying, I actually think I tweeted this recently. I I've kind of been avoiding TikTok because I like at the start when it kicked off at the start of lockdown, I was kind of a bit like, nah, not for me. But it took a year, but now I'm like getting into it. And my For You page, for some reason, TikTok has decided that I want to see, like multiple people of color who would just pop up, and it's just like my take on why reverse racism does exist, or cultural appropriation doesn't exist in Britain. We're all fine. And it's just like, what, like, why do you feel the need to give your hot take on these topics that are actively putting your own culture, your own people at a disadvantage?
People
Like,
do it for clout, and it. People will say anything to get followers these days, and that's the sad thing. And I think cultural appropriation is the baby of the empire. We went to different cultures, different countries, and we took bits and monetized it to make money from ourselves. And cultural appropriation is just literally the byproduct of that. We go to the Caribbean, we like the way Caribbean dress, we like Caribbean music, we like Caribbean clothes, but we don't necessarily like the people. We go to India, we like the food, we like the fabrics, but we don't necessarily, we like tea, we like coffee, we like lemons, but we don't necessarily like the people. We go to China, we like the like food, the culture, the textiles that are produced there, but again, we don't necessarily embrace the people. And I think like that literally is the perfect metaphor for appropriation, because
yeah,
that's literally what we're still doing, you know.
for sure. Like the amount of people that'll be moaning about missing a Chinese takeaway or Chinese restaurant throughout lockdown, but then aren't saying a word about what's going on in terms of the rise in hate against East Asian people at the moment in light of coronavirus. Like, yeah, like there's a lot of what's the word? It's where when you're like doing it on social media, like social activism, like
Yeah.
where you're just doing it like posting a black square. That's me done for today.
And
Like,
it comes back to that thing of how you're adding value. Like, that's something that I call people out on. Well, not personally. I'm not like this guy who sits there on Twitter and is just angry, just some angry youth. I'm not about that. But like when I see companies do it, or even like some Manchester kind of like companies that are about it, who posted the black square, I'm like, okay, that's cool. You've posted the black square and you've done your thing, but what now? Like, how are you committed to this change? How are you showing me that you're committed to this change? What's your hiring ratio? What outreach are you doing? What internalized dialogue are you creating amongst your staff? What does your board look like? All of that is what needs to change. And like when I'm seeing people, I think this is all available for people to go and see. And I think like once you kind of scratch the surface, you can see what companies and what people are really about it and who's just doing it for the clout.
yeah, no, for real. It was so many companies that came forward and posted the black square, and haven't heard. Have they disappeared since? Like, where have they gone? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I think it's just annoying. Like, I don't want to get too much into it because I feel like we're going to run out of time. But yeah, it's just bare annoying. But yeah, we're going to play My Antenna now, followed by Duppy Dub. So do you want to just introduce My Antenna?
Cool. So I'm J.Chambers, and this is a spoken word piece called My Antenna, which is about my locks.
Yes, that was Process by J.Chambers on Pi Radio. So I wanted to ask, first of all, what is the process?
I think it's just kind of, I feel like when we're talking about all of these different issues, you can kind of get really bogged down. And it's like with anything, you can get really bogged down and down about things. And I think like trusting in the process is almost trying to be a bit more hopeful. So just focusing on what you can control. Again, bringing back to that, how do I add value, or how do I make change locally, or how do I make change personally, so that these things, I can protect myself from these things within these different areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Just thinking as well about the song in general. You speak a lot about your gran in that. Is that an important relationship that you've had in your life?
Yeah, like if it wasn't for my gran coming from Jamaica, I wouldn't be here. And I just think about that, like my gran like when my grandparents when they left Jamaica had like what 4 kids, and it's just like you're leaving, you're coming with they left 4 kids there with their sister, and then they paid and sent for one individually. So it's like not only are you coming to this country to set yourself up, you're then sending for your kids, and you're like adjusting to this landscape. And I'm just like, yo, that's like that the bravery of kind of like the generations of people that have had to migrate just isn't really kind of understood or even spoken about. Like, think about how mad that is, like going from a Caribbean lifestyle and the Caribbean way to like having to completely learn a new set of cultural norms almost. Like, and when you read books that are written by people that were from the Windrush generation, they talk about how they had to adapt to the British way of life and the British culture, like whether it's simple things like fish and chips being wrapped up in newspaper, like, and stuff like that, like learning and thinking about different things in a different way. So yeah.
I think I saw something recently as well that was about like generational pain and trauma, which I thought was really interesting, and it was making reference to the fact that, and before I say this, I just want to say I'm not in any way comparing what's going on now to slavery. It's purely to point out how bad it is. But everything that's going on with COVID now, a lot of people are feeling down. A lot of people are feeling the effects of it. They're feeling it's the whole world seems to have grown to a halt, and people are feeling down because they're seeing others' pain, and because we're kind of experiencing this as humanity. So then someone like commented that and said like, well, when you say that, can you not think about how when a race was like tortured, enslaved, and all these horrible things for hundreds of years, do you not think it then makes sense when people argue, oh, slavery happened, like, ended hundreds of years ago, why it would not then pass on through the generations? You know what I mean? Like some people argue like, oh, but you never suffered that, so why does that affect you? But then it's like, if we're now feeling like COVID, when like the effects of that, like mentally, when we're not even like actually going through anything that bad, it's just we've been locked inside for a bit. That isn't to belittle anyone that's going through anything. If you are, please seek help. But I think it just puts everything into perspective, doesn't it? Like, I don't think you can really argue that the idea of generational trauma and pain being passed on isn't a thing.
Definitely, and especially when we contextualize it and think about mass amounts of young black people that are incarcerated for mad charges that perhaps their white counterparts wouldn't get. That relates to the experience of being locked in. We've all had a taste of that throughout being in lockdown, how that must feel. Also, we need to also think about the fact that we're just exposed to violence all the time. Like the fact most of us saw the original George Floyd video with police officers kneeling on this man's neck and no one blinked an eye. No one actually thinks about the desensitization in terms of the value of black life. And it's almost like we see these things all of the time and no one processes that actually it's a loss of life. It's just like, oh, there's another cop killing in America. Whether it's like Philando Castile, the one who was shot in front of his kid and his girlfriend as well, are also here. But then that's what happens, and this is what I'm saying about the thing. Because everything in America now, they've progressed in terms of using their phones as tools to capture this and to speak about it. We're a little bit behind the times with that. And so because we've got so much almost evidence of it happening, it's very easy for us as a country to be like, okay, that's a problem that's over there because we're not documenting it as much. But then when you actually read and do the research, like I was saying, 2 people died in police custody in Wales, like literally just last month. And, you know, there's been protests in Wales about that, yet there's been no kind of national coverage as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. Like I just don't. The thing is, I understand like why like everyone knows why it's happening, but like it's just incredulous to even think about the fact that taken for example, Mohammed Hassan, who the police came to his house. There was a bit of a raucous. He was taken to police custody. He was held there overnight. He had contact with, I think, 53 police officers had contact with him in the time that he was in police custody. Returns home the next day without being charged with loads of injuries, and then passes away. And it's just kind of like I don't how has that even happened? And also, how is no one like how is this allowed to happen? Like, it's just, and it's like, again, this is Wales. It's not even like England. It's Wales. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just insane.
It was like when police broke that young boy's neck in London. Was it Rashan Charles, the one who got his neck snapped? No police were charged from that. Even though they broke his neck, there was no wrongful doing, and this guy is like a shell of his former self because he's got massive personal impact, obviously, from having his neck broken. And I feel like that this is where the trauma comes from. It's because we're seeing all of these instances, and it's like, yo, there's the whole thing of Black Twitter in it, where it's an echo chamber of where we're seeing this and these discussions that are taking place, and it's like everyone is seeing this, but then no one's covering it, and because no one's covering it, it's like the voice isn't there and the voice isn't being heard. Then because your voice isn't being heard, this frustration then can be manifested and obviously come out in other areas, whether it's like obviously not wanting to engage in political protest, whether it's being unnecessarily angry, whether it's not valuing education. All of this is because of the value and the obviously the not kind of accessing, almost like the powers that be not acknowledging that these issues exist and making change around it. Like, have we seen videos of, say, a young English boy being killed who wasn't a person of color? I'm pretty sure there would be a lot more of a prolific response from the government. Like, even to things like in the project I talk about, the New Cross massacre, a party in the early 90s where 13 young black people died in the borough of Lewisham, but because it was a fire that was started by National Front. The Queen and the Prime Minister, who was Margaret Thatcher at that time, didn't even go and visit it. But then when there was a similar event that happened in Dublin, the Dublin disco fire, they both went there and they also sent condolences. So it's just like, again, like, how do you think people are going to feel if you're taking away their ability to reinvent themselves? This is what happens.
Sure. Coming to the end of the LP now, I just want to confirm as well, is it 213 or 218?
This one's a funny one. So it was originally 218, but then the scripture that it references is Joel 213, so I changed the title.
Sure. Well, that makes sense now. So 213 featuring Too Nice. I actually wasn't aware that Too Nice was your cousin, so I'm sorry to hear. Obviously, it's been a few years, but I'm sorry for his passing.
Oh, thank you.
So how did that track come about?
It was a really trippy story. So I hadn't been in touch with Leon for a while. That was his name. He was a musician, and his mum and his dad passed away, and he had loads of issues with it, obviously coping with it, and we just kind of lost touch. And he like literally called me. It was so random. Like, as we kind of got back in touch, we were talking about like music, and he was sending me all of these voice notes. And so I sent him the 213 beat, and he's like, yo, I love this. And he sent me a voice note of his hook. And this was like on the 3rd of Feb, innit? So we were just going through it, and then we spoke on the phone, and we're just having really good vibes. And it was from that we were like, we're gonna defo do this track. So I went away and wrote my verses that same day. And it was like literally in the evening of that day, I started seeing like tributes from like other artists that I've worked with them, like Wiley and Gemma Fox and people like that. And then I called his brother, and he's like, yeah, he's dead. And I was like, yo, what? Like, I literally spoke to him 3 hours ago. And it's like, it turned out he fell asleep, he had epilepsy, he then had a fit in his sleep, and then died in it. So it was just like a bit of a mad one. And so we had to take the voice note that he sent me and sample it and try and clean it up as best as we could to do the song justice. But it was a whole thing of where I wasn't even going to do the song. It was only until my family said I needed to that I did it.
For sure. So you say the main line in the song is keep your eyes to the sky if you want to survive. Just know money and happiness can be at the same time. So I wanted to know, like, what does that actually mean?
Because to a lot of young people, and not even just young people, but people like all the time, particularly like within my community, we talk about like money being access and money then giving you access to creating happiness. Because, you know, you're able to buy what you want, you're able to move where you want, you're able to kind of get rid of these different boxes that society place you in. And it's almost like the realization that, you know, whilst that is true and money is access and money is power and all of those things, happiness is something that's completely separate to it, and you can separate the two. So it's almost like realizing that you can have both, and it is also relative. It's like, okay, you know, if you're living within a certain area and, you know, you want to make a change, you can kind of work hard and move out of that area or do something to add value to that area, and your happiness doesn't necessarily need to be attached to the resources that you have access to. So it's kind of trying to be positive and being like, you know, yeah, we're in this kind of situation where we know what it is with the government, we know what it is with the powers that be, but we can have some control over what we do and how we feel about it by that.
Mhm. So, why did you want to finish the LP with this track?
Because I feel like it's the perfect way of rounding up what I was going to say. Escape the Kingdom comes in really hard. Well, the intro is hard hitting. The Escape the Kingdom comes in really hard and is like a mission statement. And like every song is just peppering what I'm trying to say all the way through it. And then I think that 218 is just, it's a bit more easygoing. It's a bit more kind of relaxed in the sense of, I'm saying stuff, but you can kind of take it in. And I just felt like, the message of rendering your hearts and not your garments, which what Leon used, which was a Bible scripture, Joel 2:13. I think that was kind of like something that I wanted people to think about, because like valuing what's inside rather than what you wear also could be interpreted as valuing what you have inside rather than what people judge you for as your exterior, whether it's your skin color, your gender, your race, wherever you're from. And so I thought that was a message I wanted to leave my listener with.
Sure. So we'll give that a play now. So do you want to just introduce the final track of the LP?
Yo, this is J.Chambers. You're locked into Pi Radio, and this is 213 featuring Too Nice. R.I.P.